Tom, NDP this weekend electing a new leader. I hate to put it this way. It seems like really not very many people care.
I think that it's a very good way to put it because, you know what? Not many people care. There has been a bit of work done. David Colello, out of Abacus Research, has published several papers in the past couple of weeks trying to explain the phenomenon, the dip in the dippers' support. Worst result in the party's history, of course, in the last election, all the way down to 7 seats from a high of 102. And now it's heading to 5 because, of course, Laurie Edelhout brought it down from 7 to 6. She went over and joined the Liberals. And Alexandre Boulris is trying to make a secret out of something that everybody knows, which is he's about to leave the NDP and go over and run for Quebec Solidaire. So it's a real shame, especially the last part, because it means that the party will no longer be a national party, which is something that Jack Layton fought so hard with me to do, get a breakthrough in Quebec and make sure that the party could represent the whole country. Avi Lewis, I believe, is going to win. You never know completely in advance because there could be a surprise, but I've never seen anybody be so far ahead in the fundraising and not win leadership. So it's going to be interesting to watch. He's the type of guy who's got a very high opinion of his opinions. He wants to basically shut down the large chunks of the resource sector, which have been keys to the Canadian economy and our success over the decades, because he's decided that oil and gas can't be exploited and you can't use it at all, and he's basically wants to leave it in the ground. But you can, because you can still meet your international obligations and have that sector working. He's going to have fights with the provincial parties, which are all part of the national party, so that's going to be interesting. And at the same time, he's drawing young people in from the large cities who are keen on his ideas about socialism. He wants to have the Canadian government run a grocery store, or a grocery chain for people to get cheaper groceries. I guess they're going to have Canada Post deliver the groceries because, of course, that works so well. And why not? The federal government running a grocery store, that's bound to be a success. So, this is the type of thing that you're looking at, something from a living room discussion from the 1970s. And there was a movement called the Waffle Movement in the NDP back in the day, and this was the type of stuff they were espousing. His dad used to be the head of the Ontario NDP. His grandfather, David Lewis, was the head of the federal NDP, and he's decided he wants to shake things up. I think he's going to do that, but I spent the good part of the week at a university in Ontario that has a lot of tradition with the NDP, and I didn't meet a single person who thought that this was going to work, and I met a bunch of people who were convinced that the next election could be the wipeout of the NDP, frankly.
Tom, I was going to ask you if the federal NDP has lost its way, but I think the other question I'd ask is, given when you were, of course, with that party, and we know the Orange Wave and what happened back then, how galling is it to see this?
It's rough, because we worked so hard, especially the first thing that I mentioned, which was to try to get a beachhead in Quebec, which we did when I won, in Outremont, implausibly, in a very strong Liberal riding. But people were interested in Layton. They were interested in the NDP. They started pricking up their ears. They were tired a little bit of the usual things that were on offer, and the NDP offered something different. And it especially allowed the NDP to say we're now a national party, and which it had never been, because it never had any presence in Quebec. It never worked. And so I think that something big is being lost in terms of Canada's offer politically, because we were always able to occupy that space, that social democratic space. We were part of it. And within Canada, there was an option different that often wound up pushing whichever party was in power, usually the Liberals, to do the types of things that were on our program. So if you go back in history, if you look at things like Medicare, Tommy Douglas, NDP, CCF. If you look at things like a national pension plan, CCF, NDP. CCF was the precursor of the NDP.
Yeah.
If you look at things like employment insurance, so you go down the list of things that have been brought in over the years, and you realize that a lot of this had to do with the NDP, its vision, for how the country could go. And some of it was considered radical at the time, but it's now considered the most mainstream Canadian stuff. So maybe some of the ideas of Avi Lewis will go through and will be considered mainstream in 10 or 20 years. But I don't see the willingness to work with other people and to do the politics of politics. Because, for example, he wants to be the leader, but then he's also said that he doesn't want to run in the first by-election that comes open. There will probably be a by-election in a Toronto riding called Beaches East York. We used to hold it for the NDP under me. A fellow named Matt Kelway was our MP. And he grew up in Toronto. He has he wouldn't be considered a parachute candidate. But if he doesn't run there when it comes open, because they're expecting the current MP there to run for the leadership of the provincial Liberals in Ontario, if he doesn't run there, then there's something terribly wrong. Or as one of the other candidates said, it's a bit odd to want to be the leader but not want to run in a by-election and actually become a member of the House of Commons.
It's like a lot odd, not a bit odd. All right, let me move on to the other story. We've been talking about the Supreme Court hearings for the past 4 days.
Yeah.
I had Julius Gray on earlier this afternoon. He and I guess it's fair to say he kind of took a bit of a rebuke from the Supreme Court, the head chief of the Supreme Court, over this idea that English or the English community here is more diverse than the French, which he said he never said. So he said that the justice misheard him. Have you heard this story?
That's a very polite, deferential way that my dear friend that I've known and worked with for so many years, Julius Gray, would have it, and he has to be that polite. I would be a little bit more direct and say he was trying to put words in Julius's mouth, because he was getting into a state of high dudgeon about something that indeed wasn't said. Julius simply affirmed that the English-speaking community was very diverse, and somehow the Chief Justice took umbrage at that and saying, are you saying that the French-speaking community is less diverse?
Right.
No, but if you look at the history of this, the French-speaking community was a lot less diverse in its schools, because anybody who came in, like I have family members and friends who came in from Europe and including from France in the 50s and 60s, and when they tried to get their kids into French school, they were told, oh no, you're not Catholic, so you can't go to French school. It means that you're Protestant. But they weren't Protestant either. And it was just the weirdest, and Anglophone. So Quebec has this history of keeping everybody out of the French schools except French Catholics. We went over to a linguistic system. I was there in the National Assembly when we did that, and that was a move in the right direction for sure. Well, let's not pretend that the history of the two school sections, which is now the English side and the French side, that the history of the diversity there is exactly the same. I don't think that the Chief Justice was on solid ground trying to affirm that, because he was trying to say that Julius had put forward something that he never really said.
Right. All right. I wonder, too, we're not going to get a decision. We talked about this before. It's going to be months away. You kind of wonder, though, when a justice, in this case, the Chief Justice, reacted that way, you kind of wonder, I hate to say this, is the eventual decision here already kind of skewed?
No, because he's not going to make the decision alone. But what is sad is that the best person on the Supreme Court in terms of knowledge of the minority language school board issue is an Alberta judge of the Supreme Court named Mary Moreau. She is the national expert on this. She's pleaded the cases. She knows this law cold. But she's had to be pulled out because another judge had been a member of one of the groups that was pleading before the Supreme Court. So it was a conflict of interest. He had to use a funny word, recuse himself, pull himself away from the trial. And then the Chief Justice, it's a custom, he takes the newest member and removes that person to keep an odd number, because you can't have eight people hearing a case, because you could wind up with a 4-4 split. Right. So that's an impossibility. So it's going to be 7. I think it's going to be a very divided court. I'll agree with you to a certain extent. I think that Chief Justice Wagner has been telegraphing where he wants to go. But let's not just look at this case. Let's look at the one from 2 weeks ago with regard to people who were seeking refugee status here. People who were coming in and trying to get their kids into a daycare. They were being denied by Quebec law. And the Supreme Court said, no, that's illegal, because it discriminates between women and men, because women bear the brunt of the burden of raising their kids. And this is equality that's guaranteed by Section 28 of the Charter. This is very interesting, because Justice Wagner wanted to stay away from that. He agreed in the result that those families should be allowed to have access to childcare. But he said it's not a question of equality between women and men. He said, no, it's just a question of the fact that they have this refugee status. And that's, for me, that was a tip of that he was heading in one direction. Right. He wanted to keep this away from Section 28. You know why? Because you can't use the notwithstanding clause against to save inequality between women and men. So Quebec's law could fall, a big chunk of it, because of that one, and because of the minority school stuff. I know people get lost in this notwithstanding clause. What does that mean? All the notwithstanding clause means is the government's allowed to take away your rights, and you can't do anything about it. But there are 2 areas where they can't take your rights away: minority language school boards and equality between women and men. And that might be where the Supreme Court hangs its hat, at least the majority of it.
Tom, I want to wrap up, but I did want to ask you real quick to weigh in on Mark Miller, Federal Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, taking a bit of heat. He went after the Bloc Québécois, and I read part of this, and I'm like, good for you, Mark Miller, but what happened here?
Well, I think that I went, good for you, Mark Miller, as well, because this is the eternal debate about the state of French in Quebec and especially in Montreal. And, it was great this week. The mayor of Montreal, Soraya Martinez Ferrara, looking at this and saying, no, we're going to have a good program that the city of Montreal is going to help enrich, and this is great. This is fine. But there's been a long-standing argument about what the actual figures are. Is French in decline? It's supposed to be taken as a matter of faith, not to be debated. Not too many things in our society that you can't debate. And when you look at the stats and the numbers, 95% of people in Greater Montreal can hold a conversation in French. It's not true that you have any trouble getting service in French in Montreal. So what are people like the Bloc Québécois, what are they talking about when they constantly affirm that, there's this great danger? You're not even supposed to be able to say that. So what Mark Miller is doing is intelligently, because he's a very smart guy, pushing back on that. And it's high time that somebody pushed back. Yeah. But I remember when MP Lambropoulos from Saint Laurent had the nerve to say, I don't think that it's true that French is in such dire straits.
Yeah, remember the price she paid, right?
They fell on her like a ton of bricks. Mélanie Joly, scolding her on the public square. I mean, she was in the stocks, and it was just like, really? So you can't have debates about this. You can't talk about whether it's true or whether it's just used as a political artifice to try to get more votes.
All right, Tom, we leave it at that. You have a great weekend, and thank you so much.
You too.
Canadian women are looking for more out of themselves, their businesses, their elected leaders, and the world around them.
And that's why we're thrilled to introduce the Honest Talk podcast.
I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark. And in this podcast, we interview Canada's most inspiring women.
Entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, politicians, and newsmakers, all at different stages of their journey.
So if you're looking to connect, then we hope you'll join us.
Listen to the Honest Talk podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you listen to your podcasts.